The Night Shift, Part 1, Arrival and First Calls. It's a peculiar thing, how silence gathers in hospitals after midnight. It isn't the absence of sound so much as the way the building rearranges itself around the sounds that remain, the distant wheeze of a ventilator like an old man's breath, the intermittent ping of monitors that sound, to the practiced ear, like heartbeats being counted on a clock. Walls, fluorescent fixtures, and linoleum conspire to make a hush that's almost dense enough to touch. At 3 in the morning the corridors of St. Bridget's seemed to hold their breath. I arrived to that hush on the first Wednesday in November, the town's trees a mesh of black against a sky that had never been particularly poetic, just the kind of cold, low cloud you learn to call autumn in a place where seasons are literal and practical things. I parked in a lot still salted from earlier snows and pushed through the revolving doors that sighed shut behind me. My key badge clicked as I tapped it at the nurse's station, Maya Reyes, RN. Night shift. I'd worked nights before, college clinics, a stint in the ER during grad school, but St. Bridget's night shift had a way of feeling like the loop track of a record you could step off if you were careful, but never completely leave. I'd taken the job 3 weeks earlier because it paid better than the outpatient gig I'd had and because St. Bridget's offered health insurance that didn't make me consider which of my teeth I could afford to lose. I had come back to my hometown for reasons that were austere and private, my father's health sliding into a bureaucratic haze, my sister's new job that didn't leave much time for her to be anything beyond available on the weekends. I was 29 and ostentatiously practical. The town was small enough that people still learned one another's histories at soccer games and grocery store lines. St. Bridget's was older than the modern wing that housed the ICU, and its brick face wore its age like a secret. People in town liked to say St. Bridget's had history, with the implication that some things were best left unexamined. At the nurse's station I slid into a swivel chair and logged in to the unit's digital dashboard. My primary assignments were 2 telemetry beds and a med-surgical patient who had been admitted after a fall. There was a new face on the board, room 214, unknown, admitted 2 hours before my shift, vitals stable, but with an odd notation, amnestic presentation. No ID, no family. The chart was paper thin, a skeleton with one fat entry, ER transfer, damaged memory. That kind of case makes the night staff breathe with equal parts curiosity and thin alarm. Memory is a tender ledger. When it goes missing, people notice, and hospitals become witnesses. I moved through my rounds like someone making peace with a familiar route, check monitors, offer a cup of water, reorder the mindless things that make illness feel less like a conspiracy. I stopped at room 212 where Mrs. Hargrove, 92 and ornery, complained because her socks had been arranged incorrectly. I told her the socks looked fine. She scowled and pointed at her TV remote like it was a misdemeanor. They're going to rearrange the whole floor if they leave my socks wrong, she said, and I left her to her indignation. Little rituals anchor the old. Little rituals keep memory in place. Room 214 sat at the corner of the hallway where the fluorescent light pulsed faintly. The curtain was drawn. Through the slatted window I could see a silhouette, a person resting propped up against pillows, blankets folded with the care of someone trained. I pulled on gloves more out of habit than necessity and entered. He couldn't have been older than 35. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd once been a feature in someone's photograph, symmetry, a head of hair cut short. His jaw was a map of unfinished decisions. He slept with his mouth slightly open, and when I touched his hand it was warm and solid. No hospital bracelet. No phone on the bedside table. Nothing, Really, beyond the plain hospital gown, the "4", and the temporary tattoo someone had scrawled on his arm in black marker, Trevor? That question mark sat on the skin like a punctuation of uncertainty. I checked his chart again. The ER note was suspiciously careful, found wandering Route 7. No ID. Denied knowledge of address. Exhibits episodes of confabulation, inconsistent personal history. No intoxication. Neuroimaging unremarkable. Recommended mission for observation. The neurology consult had booked him for what the doc called a neurocognitive workup. In common language, that meant I was supposed to be patient, and to watch for seizures, for behavior that suggested harm, for the oddness that sometimes announces itself in places like this, like a flat note in an otherwise whole chord. His eyes opened while I was recharting the meds. Bright, analyzing. He looked around as if trying to find a place for the room to belong. "Where am I?" he asked, voice ragged. "St. Bridget's," I told him. "You're safe. Do you remember your name?" He blinked. He reached for the marker tattoo on his arm and frowned at it, as if the ink was as perplexing as the concept. "I think I might be Trevor," he said finally. "But I'm not sure. It's an everyday contaminant of this work to become inured to the dissonance of identity. So many of our patients come with stories neatly folded into envelopes of disease, Alzheimer's, stroke, delirium, and we learn how to treat the body while sometimes the interior is a ruin. But when a young man sits and cannot outline his own life, the air exchanges a different kind of currency, confusion, a small, fierce pity, and a working instinct to hold the pieces of him together while we figure out which pieces are missing." I sat down. "Do you remember anything? An address, a phone number, where you live?" He worked his jaw like he was grinding sand. "I remember, a light." He closed his eyes and then opened them as if remembering to breathe. "A light in a room. A woman humming." And then, he groped for the tether of a sentence and failed. "I don't know." We exchanged the clinical minuet of questions: allergies, last meal, medication history. He had none. The ER had run a urine tox screen that was frustratingly clean. His blood tests were unremarkable. There were no fingerprints on his ID because there were no digits to catalog, no history that matched his face on the state's database. For all practical purposes, he was a person who had been folded out of the world. When residents' shift change began, Dr. Halpert, the night neurologist, poked his head in. He was a man whose face had been smoothed by caffeine and long letters to insurance companies. He read the chart, frowned at the absence of clear etiology, and recommended keeping him for observation. Possible dissociative amnesia, Halpert mused, or a transient global amnesia variant. Could be psychogenic. We'll schedule an EEG morning. He glanced up at me as if seeking a compromise between forms. "Sleep, fluids, and patience," I said, because the nursing vernacular is a list of the physical anchors you can trust: feed them, move them, make sure they don't die. That night I visited him as often as my rounds allowed. At 2 a.m. he sat up on the edge of the bed and stared at the window at the end of the hall. A pale streetlight lent his silhouette the steadiness of a witness. "Sometimes I dream a nurse," he told me then, and the way he emphasized the word made it sound like a memory of sanctuary. "She hums by a sink and hums the same way my mother used to. She always checks an old ledger." "Ledger?" I echoed, because the word sounded like a prop from an entirely different century. "The kind you keep on paper," he said. "Pen, ink. She writes names in it." He wrapped his hands around the paper cup of water I'd handed him, fingernails pressing into the cardboard with the force of someone who'd been doing small, anxious things for a long time. She says she puts names down so they're not lost. The next morning a name was down on the whiteboard in the nurse's station, shadow clinician visit at 0300, reported by patient 214. The board's dry erase marker scrawl seemed to multiply the more you looked at it. I felt an unfamiliar prickle of vertigo. Shadow clinician. I should have laughed it off as just a turn of phrase, a complaint from a delirious patient, except half the night staff had scribbled SC uncertainly beside the note, and a name had a way of finding its way into an institution's lexicon if it fit the architecture of fear. By my third week on nights I had developed a certain map of St. Bridget's Nocturne. There was always someone at the desk who remembered my mother from high school, someone in radiology who would bring leftover coffee in a thermos if you said the right names, and an evening janitor who hummed old hymns under his breath as he pushed the mop. Everyone had a ritual. People who work nights in hospitals are a particular breed of person who understand that the world loses its edges after the sun goes down and that you need to hold on to the edges you can make. It was in the cadence of those shifts that the shadow clinician's murmurs found my ears. On the Tuesday after Trevor, if that indeed was his name, was admitted, there was an alarm in the psychiatric wing. Not a medical alarm, but the kind of soft, sliding alert the hospital's safety software emits when a door that should be locked is open. It was 2 in the morning. I'd been finishing med passes on the opposite side of the floor. The alarm is the kind of sound that makes the air condense. People move toward alarms like animals toward a scent. The psych wing's outer door was a painted slab of steel and had a habit of protesting loudly when touched. That night it had been opened and closed with an economy that said the person who had moved it wanted to be unobtrusive. No alarms were tripped internally, the seclusion rooms were silent. The chart of the patient who'd opened the door, an older man with a diagnosis of late-stage dementia, was full of utilitarian notes, wandered after sundown, calmed, returned. The nurse on duty, Janelle, swore she'd seen a figure in the hallway, someone in a long white coat whose face was half shadow. Looked like a doctor from another era, she told me, chewing on the end of a pen as she spoke. Not like Dr. Halpert, longer coat, older collar. He moved like he knew the building. We laughed at first, a small and brittle sound. Hospitals collect ghosts the way a jar collects fireflies. Sometimes the idea of an apparition is nothing more than habit, memory lining itself up with architecture. But the next night another nurse, Tom, who's been on nights longer than anyone I know, told me quietly that he'd found a ledger in an old supply closet while looking for extra blankets. It was an old, leather-bound book with names and dates written in looping script. The top of the page he showed me read, in smudged ink, room checks, night shift ledger. Signed, S. Clinician. Probably just a prop someone found, Tom said. Probably someone making a joke. But when I touched the leather, the book felt oddly warm. It had a weight that suggested more than pages, like someone had kept it with intent. That night, as the curved hands of the station clock pressed toward 3, a petite woman in a white coat drifted into view at the end of the hall. Her hair was pinned at the nape, and she carried a small, brass candlestick. No, not a candlestick, a metal box that snapped open like a jewelry case. She hummed as she walked, a thin, steady tune that at once felt maternal and ceremonial. There was no stethoscope on her neck. Instead she wore, beneath the collar of her coat, an old-fashioned black ribbon. She passed room 214 and paused like a reader at a line in a book. She glanced at Trevor through the curtain and then, with a surgical precision that was almost formal, wrote something in the air with a pen I couldn't see. Her hand made the motion of ink on paper. For a second her fingers glittered with what could have been dust, or flecks of mica, or possibly memory itself. I froze in the doorway, watching. The woman didn't look at me. She didn't move the way living people move. There was a slow, ritualized economy to her gestures that suggested she was moving through a script. She turned then, and her lips formed a phrase I could not hear. The cadence matched the hum she'd been carrying under her breath. The hair at the back of my neck stood up. "Who is that?" I whispered to Tom, who had come up behind me silently like a shadow. Tom's jaw worked. He mumbled a word that might have been clinician. He'd seen the ledger. He'd heard Janelle. We watched until the figure vanished down the hall toward radiology, as if the building itself had swallowed her. Tom and I both knew how foolish it was to admit to seeing something like that. People in hospitals see strange things all the time, fevers, delirium, the edges of grief. But there was a difference between something explained by biology and something that arranged itself so precisely around old customs, the humming like a lullaby, the metal box that clicked open, the ink-written gesture. And there was the ledger. Old things like ledgers do not occupy modern hospitals by accident. The next morning I told Dr. Halpert, who smiled indulgently and suggested it was probably a retired nurse who liked to visit and had been photographed at the old nurse's desk when St. Bridget's had still kept paper charts. He suggested coffee and an investigation into the supply closet. The hospital is a place that prefers paperwork to possibility. But bureaucracy does not quell the sensation of being observed. That night, when the power hiccuped during a storm and the monitors briefly glitched into static, a soft knock came from room 214. The knock was deliberate, polite. The sort of knock you use to announce yourself in an age that believed in propriety. Trevor looked at me, eyes wide. "She's here," he said, the word a pin that punctured the night. I opened the door. In the doorway stood an old man, skin like paper, coat threadbare, hair combed carefully back, holding a tiny, brass box identical to the one the woman had carried. He set it on the bedside table and tapped it twice with a fingernail. The box opened with a sound like a library gate. Inside was a single sheet of paper and an old fountain pen with a nib black as a coal. The paper had a line down the middle, and on the left side in careful script were names, patients, dates, little marginalia, checked, reviewed, prescriptions dispensed. The right side was blank, waiting like a hand stretched out. The old man smiled at me. "We do the work while you sleep," he said in a voice that had the cadence of a hymn. "We keep the ledger so names are not lost." Who are you?" My voice sounded the way it does when you ask for an explanation you think you'll regret. He tapped the nib of the pen against the paper and watched as if inviting a performance. "A clinician," he said simply. "A keeper." I thought of the ledger in the supply closet, of the woman with the ribbon, of the hush that gathered after midnight. I thought of the patient in the bed who would not remember his own name. There are some places in life where language is inadequate, where nouns thrum like loose wires and verbs connive. That night, sometime after the old man left, with his brass box that clicked closed as if the sound itself was a benediction, Trevor's sleep fractured like thin glass. He woke with a shout and clutched his head. "They asked me to write," he said, breathless. "They asked me to name the room. They wanted the ledger." "What ledger?" I asked, because I did not know whether to be clinical or afraid. He laughed, and it sounded like someone else. There are so many, he said. They all want to be named. The person in the wallpaper wants a name. The light wants a name. The sink, it keeps humming because it wants a name. It would have been easy to chalk Trevor's words up to confabulation, the brain's attempt to stitch together a narrative cloth from ragged threads. But his eyes were clear and terrified. Memory loss is not always a vacuum, sometimes it is a negotiation between what wants to be remembered and what wants to be left alone. When my shift ended at 7, I walked to my car with the ledger's image in my mind. The air on the pavement made silver ghosts of streetlights. I felt, for the first time since I'd taken the job, like I was standing on a threshold I could not name. Hospitals are places of official forgetting, diagnoses that redefine lives, charts that recategorize suffering. But sometimes, I realized, there is a different kind of forgetting, one that is organized, tidy, and practiced. A forgetting that requires someone to stand at night and sign names into a book so that the world can believe those people remain intact. On my way out, I glanced at the dark windows of the hospital and imagined a squad of clinicians moving with the meticulousness of old monks, humming and keeping their pens poised. The town ran its fingers over the hospital's brick, and I felt, like a pulse beneath the skin, the sense that I had stumbled into an institution where old customs did not merely survive but performed their own economy. My phone buzzed as I started the car. A text from my sister, "Hey, call me when you're free." Dad's doc called. "Might be the treatment plan. Love you." I thumbed a reply. On my way home. Call tonight. I wasn't sure whether I'd sleep. That night I dreamed of the ledger. I dreamed of a notebook the size of a chest, and inside, the pages turned on their own, and every name written bent like a reed until the ink read nothing but an echo. I woke with my hand outstretched, expecting the texture of paper. There was nothing in my palm. At 3 a.m., when I would ordinarily have been halfway through my second cup of terrible hospital coffee, I received a notification from the hospital's security system that a new entry had been logged in the supply closet's ledger. M. Reyes, night shift, witnessed shadow clinician, signed. There was no timestamp beyond the hour, and my stomach clenched like a fist. I pressed my palm flat against the steering wheel, breath shallow, and wondered which ledger, exactly, now carried my name. I wondered also, with a more private and quieter alarm, what it meant to have your attention noted in places where people kept accounts of the world at the edge of night. When I drove away, St. Bridget's brick face receded into the black like a thing that had not been taken seriously enough. I wanted to tell myself that the ledger, the pen, the brass box, these were ornaments on a story we make up to explain the things we do not have words for. I wanted to believe we could dismiss them with a laugh and a chart. But the next morning, when I clocked back in, the patient list on the board had a new note beside room 214, patient requests, ledger. Patient claims to recall names not his own. There are nights when a hospital will live within the sound of its own screws tightening and other nights when its history slides under your skin. I had worked long enough to know the difference between a practical problem and a place that wanted to rearrange the coordinates of your life. Something here was not merely assembling a ledger for the dead. It was compiling names. It was patient, like a river that cuts a canyon not through violence but through endless, precise insistence. If the ledger was a book of names, I realized, then the people who came to St. Bridget's at night were, for reasons I did not yet understand, both contributors and contributions. And if someone or something was keeping accounts, I suspected it would not be content merely to observe. It would want signatures. Night shifts have their own weather. Not the kind measured by barometers or wind vanes, but the kind that changes the inner climate of a building, the temperature of fear, the humidity of memory, the pressure of silence. By week 3, St. Bridget's had begun to feel less like a place where I worked and more like a place that worked on me. I arrived Wednesday night already tense. My name being written in the ledger had lodged itself under my ribs like a splinter. You don't expect the building you work in to start documenting you through channels outside payroll systems and scheduling software. You don't expect paper, old paper, to know who you are. I swiped my badge at 10:57 p.m. and stepped into the hallway. The hospital smelled the way hospitals always do, antiseptic and old air and metal warmed by machines. But under it, faint but undeniable, was a threaded scent I had never noticed until the ledger and its keepers, dust from old books, and the faint sweetness of aging paper. The scent of archives. The scent of history being opened. I stopped at the nurses' station. Only 2 other night nurses had clocked in so far, Tom, red-eyed and sipping black coffee, and Marcy, who looked like she'd slept about 11 minutes. The whiteboard had a new note in a shaky hand. SC sighted in East Wing at 2 o'clock. Non-intervention ordered. SC equals shadow clinician. Someone had underlined NO and intervention 3 times. Who added that? I asked. Tom didn't look up from his coffee. Admin. What? My voice cracked into a whisper. The administration knows about the shadow clinician? He shrugged hard enough to say he didn't want to talk about it. Rumor is, it's a tradition. Old St. Bridget's thing. They say it's part of the building. Don't poke the bear. But it's showing up on charts, on the board. Yeah, he muttered, and if you want my opinion, that's the real problem. He finally looked over at me with the exhausted eyes of a man who'd seen too many things he couldn't fit into documentation codes. The shadow clinician used to only show up to certain patients. End-of-life ones. Ones who had lost memory or identity. Almost like, he swallowed. Almost like they were preparing them. For what? I asked. Tom's mouth tightened. For moving on. I thought he meant death. And then he said, quietly, no. Not death. Something else. 214, Trevor, begins to change. When I approached room 214, I expected another night of confused questions, maybe more talk about ledgers or humming. But what I found instead made my stomach drop. Trevor was sitting upright, fully alert, writing in a notebook. Writing. For someone who couldn't remember his own name 2 days ago, that was jarring enough. But the way he wrote, fast, continuous, as if transcribing some inner dictation, was unnatural. Hey, I said quietly. What are you working on? He didn't look up. His pencil moved in an unbroken stream. I stepped closer and felt cold rush into my bones. He was filling page after page with names. Neatly written. Columned. Alphabetical in sections. Some crossed out. Some circled. Some marked with dates. It looked exactly like the ledger. I swallowed. Trevor? He finally lifted his face to me. His eyes were wrong. Not empty, not glazed. Busy. Like someone inside them was multitasking. I remembered something, he said, his voice calm and eerie. She showed me where names go. My skin crawled. Who showed you? He blinked slowly. The night nurse. No one in our hospital wore a ribbon around their neck or a long white coat anymore. The night nurse wasn't living staff. I forced my voice to sound steady. What does she want? Trevor's smile was small and ancient. She wants the names to continue. I checked his vitals to ground myself. Heart rate, elevated slightly. BP, normal. Pupils, reactive. Nothing medically explained the shift I saw before me. He returned to writing without waiting for dismissal. The graphite scraped in rhythmic strokes. I left the room, pulse hammering. The administrator who pretended not to know. At 1:30 a.m., after checking my other patients, I decided to confront someone who might actually know something. Senior Administrator Marcus Vane, mid-50s, severe haircut, the gait of someone who managed budgets more than people. I found him in his office, asleep upright in his chair, glasses hanging from one ear. He snapped awake when I knocked. "What is it?" he asked. "I need to ask about the shadow clinician." His nostrils flared slightly, as if I'd dragged in something foul. "We discourage using that term. But the staff uses it," I said. "And I saw." "I know what you think you saw, Nurse Reyes," he said, rubbing his forehead. "Night staff are prone to projections." "Don't patronize me," I said, stepping in. "I saw her. And last night I saw him. And one of my patients is copying the ledger they carry." He froze. "You saw him? The older one?" I nodded. His hands trembled. He clasped them together to hide it. Marcus exhaled shakily. "That's not good." "Why? Who is he?" "He's not a person," Marcus whispered. "He's part of the inheritance of this building." "What does that even mean?" He pinched the bridge of his nose. St. Bridget's was originally built over the foundations of the Ashwood Memory Asylum in 1904. Some of the old rooms, the corridors, the basement archives, they were never demolished properly. Some say the asylum wasn't just for housing the mentally ill. It was for extracting memories. Extracting. Patients back then weren't treated. They were collected. Their histories, their identities, their essences, as the old staff called it, were recorded and catalogued. It was a belief system, a ritual. And some of those rituals stayed with the building. My skin prickled. "So the shadow clinician is part of the old roster," Marcus said. "An echo of a role. A function that refuses to retire. But why appear now? Why to Trevor?" Marcus leaned forward, voice low. "Because he fits the pattern. People with lost identity attract them. They're like open tabs in a ledger that hasn't been balanced." A chill swept down my spine. "Trevor isn't the only one," Marcus added grimly. "Every few years, someone shows up on Route 7. No ID. No past. No records. As if they were." He hesitated. "As if they were left blank on purpose." 2:59 a.m., the humming begins again. Back on the unit, I made it halfway down the hall when I heard it. Humming. Soft. Maternal. Steady. Coming from no visible source. Every fluorescent light flickered with the rhythm of the hum, like breath syncing with a lullaby. Marcy, at the station, gripped her chair. "Do you hear that?" "Yeah. It's coming from Psych Wing." "No. It was coming from everywhere. From the vents. From the walls. From under the floors. Like the building itself was humming." We exchanged a terrified look. Then the humming stopped. All the lights went dead. Every monitor and machine powered off simultaneously. The sudden void of sound punched the air like a vacuum seal. Emergency lights snapped on, dim, red, pulsing. A shape stood at the far end of the hallway. Tall. White coat. Ribbon at the throat. The night nurse. Her silhouette glowed faintly in the red emergency light, like a negative image from an old photograph. She walked calmly toward room 214. I sprinted. Hey! Stop! What are you doing? She didn't turn. Her feet made no sound. Trevor's room glowed with unnatural brightness. Light seeped through the cracks around the door, white and trembling like something incandescent. When the night nurse reached the door, she lifted her hand and she knocked. 3 soft taps. I skidded to a halt just behind her. Nurses don't knock, I blurted out. We go in. She turned her head slightly. Not enough to reveal her face fully. Just enough that I saw. There was no face. Only shifting lines. The faint hint of features that rearranged themselves constantly, like a portrait painted on water. She spoke. Her voice was layered. One tone old, one young, one whispering from decades ago. All names must be recorded. Even those who are lost. A wind blew down the corridor though no windows were open. The emergency lights pulsed. Stop, I said. Stop whatever you're doing to him. She leaned closer to Trevor's door. He is ready. For what? I shouted. Her reply was soft and catastrophic. To be remembered. Then she vanished. Not in a puff. Not as a ghost. She simply ceased. Like a candle snuffed. A presence erased mid-sentence. Behind the door, Trevor screamed. Trevor's mind opens. I burst into the room. Trevor was half standing, half collapsed over the side rail. Monitors were flickering wildly back to life. His notebook, filled with names, had caught fire. Actual fire. A thin line of flame traced the edges of the pages, consuming them but leaving his hands untouched. Trevor! Trevor, talk to me! He looked directly at me with eyes that were no longer wholly his. I remember, he whispered. What do you remember? Everything she wanted me to remember. He pointed at the burning notebook. I didn't write those names. They wrote themselves. My heart slammed. What does that mean? He grabbed my wrist, hard. They're not collecting patients, he said. They're collecting identities. What identities? He leaned close. The ones the building lost. The ones the asylum erased. The ones that don't belong to anyone anymore. The flames turned cold blue. His voice dropped to a trembling whisper. The ledger isn't a book. It's a replacement system. For who? For patients who disappear. My blood iced. Disappear? Trevor nodded. Tears streaked his face. The hospital doesn't just treat people. It reassigns them. Footsteps in the ceiling. There was a sudden sound overhead. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Measured. Walking directly above us. The floor above was storage. No one walked there at night. No one could. The doors were locked. But the steps continued, paced, like someone patrolling. I whispered, do you hear that? Trevor didn't blink. They're taking roll call. Who? The substitute clinicians. The footsteps stopped. Right above us. Then a second set joined them. Then a third. 3 figures. 3 sets of footsteps. Then, one set moved toward the stairwell. And descended. Something is coming down the stairs. The stairwell door at the end of the hallway groaned as if being pushed by invisible hands. Its hinges whined. Its metal buckled. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 taps. The signature. Marcy stumbled out of the nurse's station, pale. Something's outside that door, she whispered. Tom appeared beside her, eyes wide. Don't open it. Trevor's burning notebook floated an inch off the bed. I didn't choose this, he whispered. I didn't come here by accident. What do you mean? I asked. His lips trembled. I think I was already part of the ledger. The stairwell door handle twisted. Slowly. Metal screeched. Something on the other side pressed once. Twice. A third time. Then the handle began to turn. Tom backed away. Marcy ran. I stood frozen. Trevor, trembling, whispered. They're here to replace me. End of part 2. The stairwell handle turned with the slow certainty of a surgeon preparing an incision. No hesitation. No wasted movement. Each click of metal reverberated through the hallway like a pulse being counted by something that didn't need a heart of its own. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a stainless steel 4-pole. It shook in my hands. The emergency lights above us flickered with the same rhythm as my heartbeat. Knock. Soft. Patient. The knock of someone who already knew what was waiting on the other side. Trevor squeezed his eyes shut. Please, he whispered, don't let them in. I won't, I lied. Because my legs felt like water and the pole in my hands felt like it belonged to someone braver. The stairwell door handle twisted all the way downward. And stopped. The pressure from the other side released. The door eased back into place. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel like safety, but misdirection. Trevor's breath stumbled. They changed their mind, he whispered. No, I said. They're choosing another way in. The hallway that doesn't end. At 3:11 a.m., the time the hospital holds its coldest breath, the monitors rolled back to life. Screens blinked green, blue, white. Machines hummed. Ventilators resumed their soft mechanical size. But the hallway didn't look right. I blinked once, twice. It had lengthened. A corridor that should have been 30 yards now stretched far beyond the glow of the emergency lights. The floor pattern repeated like a copy-paste glitch in some cruel simulation. Doors were duplicated, 212, 214, 212 again, 214 again, like the building couldn't remember where rooms belonged. Trevor stared, horrified. They're preparing the ward. For what? For reassignment. What does that mean, Trevor? His voice broke. For turning people into someone else. The ledger returns. A soft thud landed on the bed between us. The brass box. The same one the old clinician carried. Its lid opened on its own. Inside sat a single sheet of paper, blank except for the header. Ledger of Reassignment, Ward 2B. Below it, columns waited. Name to be retained. Identity to be assigned. Date. Clinician signature. A pen floated above the page. Not held by a hand. suspended like a compass needle searching for true north. I'm not touching that, I whispered. Trevor shook his head vigorously. You don't have to. They only need me. The pen drifted toward him. No, I said, stepping between them. Leave him alone. The pen froze in midair, then turned toward me. The air thickened until my lungs struggled. The hallway stretched again, swallowing sound, light, time. Behind me, the stairwell door finally opened. The three clinicians. They stepped into the hall in perfect unison. Not ghosts. Not illusions. Occupations without flesh. Roles without bodies. Functions preserved by a building that refused to forget itself. The night nurse. White coat. Ribbon at the throat. Face shifting like a reflection in disturbed water. The old clinician. Thin, stooped, carrying a dim lantern that emitted no light, only shadow. The archivist. A tall figure wearing an outdated physician's coat with a high collar, their hands long and delicate like tools. They approached with the calm inevitability of paperwork being filed. The archivist spoke first. Their voice rattled like dried leaves. Identity must be balanced. The night nurse's voice overlapped. Names must be retained. The old clinician whispered. And replacements must be made. Trevor trembled violently. Don't let them, please, don't let them make me someone else. I tightened my grip on the four-pole. He's a patient. You can't just. The night nurse tilted her faceless head. All patients are names first. Bodies second. The archivist pointed a long finger at me. You signed the ledger. No, I said, backing up. I didn't. But I remembered. The ledger in the supply closet. The page that appeared the morning after. My name written neatly under, witnessed clinician activity. You signed, the archivist repeated, and therefore you belong to the ledger. My heart rattled. I didn't sign anything. The old clinician tapped his pen against the brass box. Intent is signature. The hospital rewrites itself. The corridor shifted again. The floors buckled and corrected. The ceiling dipped. The hospital lights pulsed in a heartbeat rhythm not synced to any machine. Then the walls began rearranging. Each strip of drywall peeled back like old wallpaper. Behind it were layers of the building's former self. Old asylum hallways. Brick archways. Medical wards from the 1930s. Rooms with barred windows. Faded murals of forgotten patients. The building was showing its ancestry. Its lineage. Its long habit of collecting people and purposes. Trevor clutched his head. Too many memories, too many voices. I held his shoulders. Look at me, Trevor. Stay here. Stay now. I can't, he whispered. They're pulling. The reassignment ceremony. The three clinicians formed a triangle around us. The ledger page filled with ink though no hand wrote it. A name appeared under retained. Trevor, subject unknown. And under identity to be assigned, letters floated into place. Maya Reyes. My breath vanished. No, I choked. No, why me? Why my name? The archivist answered. You are whole. He is not. Identity must be redistributed. The night nurse chimed. He is a blank. You are a narrative. The building requires equilibrium. No! I screamed. The old clinician lifted his lantern. Shadows crawled toward us like tendrils. Trevor reached for me. "Run," he whispered. But the shadow tendrils wrapped around his wrists, and his ankles, and his chest. "No! Let him go!" He was pulled upward, slowly, as if lifted by invisible hooks. He cried out, raw, animal fear. "Maya, help me! Don't let them rewrite me!" I swung the four-pole at the archivist. It passed through them like smoke. The archivists tilted their head. "You misunderstand. We are not harming him. We are finishing him." The mirror of identities. The wall behind Trevor melted away into a vast reflective surface. A mirror stretching from floor to ceiling. Inside it, I saw Trevor as a boy. Trevor as a teenager. Trevor as a man with a life I didn't recognize. Trevor as a hospital patient. Trevor as someone else entirely. Dozens of versions. None of them complete. The archivist pointed at the reflections. He was a collection of unfinished histories. This building creates continuity. And me? I demanded. Why drag me into this? The night nurse answered. You were unguarded. You asked to witness. Witnesses are incorporated. I never asked for this. Your curiosity was a signature. Trevor makes a choice. Trevor twisted against the shadows, teeth clenched in agony. Maya, he gasped, listen. I remember something now. What? The ambulance driver. The road. Before I got here. His voice cracked. I wasn't lost. I was erased. The old clinician nodded approvingly. He was delivered empty so the ledger could fill. Trevor's eyes locked onto mine, clear, desperate, human. You can't let them take you, he said. Not you. I won't, I said through tears. Promise me. I promise. Then, with some impossible surge of will, he twisted his wrists against the shadow tendrils and pulled me toward him. His face inches from mine, he whispered. They don't want me. They want a complete memory. They want what you have. So take it. What? Take what? My name, he said. What? My real one. He pressed his forehead to mine. And I heard a whisper inside my skull. A name. His true name. A name the building could not claim if I carried it. A name that grounded him, anchored him, made him someone. I gasped. He smiled weakly. You have it now. The building breaks. The clinicians recoiled. The archivist's voice sharpened. This is unacceptable. The night nurse hissed. She has taken the identity. The ledger is broken. The old clinician raised his lantern. And its shadow shattered like glass. The building groaned. Alarms erupted, real ones, modern ones. For the first time, the hospital's systems fought back. Lights surged. Sprinklers burst. The reflective wall cracked down the center. The reflective versions of Trevor rippled and dissolved. Trevor fell forward into my arms, breath rasping but alive. The clinicians screamed, not in human voices, but in the grinding metallic roar of a structure losing power. Cracks spidered along the floor. Then, a sound like a giant book slamming shut echoed through the hospital. The ledger's page ignited, bright, white flame, and consumed itself. The clinicians faded like dust in sunlight. and the hallway snapped back to normal. St. Bridget's returned, except for the smell of burnt paper and the fact that Trevor had collapsed unconscious in my lap. Aftermath. He slept for 20 hours. Doctors claimed it was neurological exhaustion. His EEG showed patterns no one could explain, like multiple memory signatures overlapping, one neurologist muttered. But when he opened his eyes the next morning, he smiled. A real smile. "I remember," he whispered. "Your name?" I asked. He squeezed my hand. "Yes." "And everything else?" He nodded slowly. "Enough." The hospital's new ledger. A week later, I went to the supply closet. The old ledger was gone. In its place sat a single sheet of paper taped to the shelf. Night shift, reassignment complete. No further signatures required. And beneath that, Clinician, Reyes, M. My breath caught. The handwriting was mine. Except I had never written it. The final twist. Trevor was discharged 2 days later with a clean bill of health. He thanked me, hugged me, left the hospital with a backpack and a quiet resolve. That night, as I sat alone in the nurse's station, reviewing charts and sipping terrible coffee, I heard the softest sound near the empty hallway. 3 gentle taps on a door that wasn't there an hour before. I froze. A brass box sat on the counter, lid open. Inside, a single blank ledger page. Waiting. My name already written at the top. Maya Reyes, Clinician in Training. And underneath, duty begins at 3:11 a.m. The humming started again. Soft. Maternal. And I realized I hadn't escaped the ledger. I had inherited it. End of story. Have a nice day. Thank you for watching.